Before there were names for gods, before men carved their prayers into clay, there were winds that wailed across the plains of Sumer. They rose at dusk and carried the taste of dust and ash. Moaning through the reeds of the rivers, it was said that these winds had a voice, a woman's cry, high and unending. And the herdsmen, hearing it in the night, would shudder and turn their faces toward the fire. For they knew her, though they would not speak her name aloud. She was the whisper in the storm, the shape glimpsed at the edge of the torchlight. She had been there when the first man laid his first boundary stone, marking the beginning of order upon the chaos of the earth. The moment he did, she stirred. Out of the unsettled air she gathered form. Long hair like smoke, eyes like the reflection of the moon on black water, wings that shimmered between feathers and flame. The Sumerians, in their oldest tongue, called her Lilith, the wind that does not rest. In those earliest days, the gods themselves were young and uncertain. They shaped the heavens with one hand and the underworld with the other, and between them lay the fragile world of men, fields, flocks, and hearths that trembled between plenty and ruin. The air was thick with unseen beings, half divine and half monstrous, each claiming dominion over the spaces between light and shadow. Lilith was among them, a creature of the threshold, neither living nor dead, neither goddess nor ghost. It was said that she was born from the waste places left over when the gods built creation, the scraps of dust and wind that could not be molded into stable form. From this formlessness, she took her nature, shifting, restless, ever hungry. She flew with the tempests that rolled in from the sea and hid in the cracks of ruined walls. When storms rattled the city gates, the people would whisper, "The Lilith passes." In Uruk, when the goddess Inanna planted her sacred tree, the Hulupu, by the river's edge, the winds still carried Lilith's scent. The story was told in hushed tones. One night, when Inanna slept, a dragon coiled itself around the roots of the tree, a bird nested in its crown, and in the hollow of its trunk, a dark spirit took her dwelling. That spirit was Lilith, lean and watchful, feeding on the dreams of the goddess. When Gilgamesh, the hero, came to cut down the tree, the dragon hewed apart. The bird flew into the mountains, and Lilith fled, her shriek echoing across the plain as she vanished into the wilderness. Thus did she become the eternal fugitive, the one who cannot abide the ordered garden. From then on, she haunted the edges of things, the boundaries of houses, the rims of wells, the border between the fields and the desert. The scribes of Ur and Lagash etched her image onto amulets and tablets. A woman's body with taloned feet, her wings spread wide, flanked by owls, the creatures of night and wisdom. In her hands, she held the symbols of life and death, the rod and the ring. For she ruled the moment between birth and the grave. In those days, mothers hung clay charms above the cradles of their infants. They carved the names of protective gods, Pazuzu, Lamastu, and others, around the figure of the night demoness, binding her with incantations. For they believed that Lilith prowled by night, seeking the warmth of the newborn. If a child sickened in its sleep, the people said Lilith had brushed her wings across its face. Yet in her own way, she was not cruel for cruelty's sake. She was hunger itself, the embodiment of longing and exile. She was the part of the world that could never be settled, the reminder that for every garden there is a desert, for every hearth, a cold wind that howls beyond the door. As the centuries passed and empires rose and fell, her name changed, but her nature did not. The Akkadians called her Lilitu, the Aramaeans Lilithu. Wherever she went, she gathered to herself the fears of humankind, the dread of childbed, the terror of solitude, the ache of desire unfulfilled. In Babylon, she was painted on boundary stones to ward off the restless dead. In Assyria, she was invoked in the chants of exorcists, her name spat through clenched teeth as they banished her from the bodies of the afflicted. But there were some who looked upon her differently. To a few mystics and dreamers, Lilith was not a monster, but a revelation. They saw in her the first wild breath of creation, the element that refused to be chained. In the silent deserts where no god's temple stood, they said she wandered freely, a queen without a kingdom. When the Hebrews came forth from the lands of Mesopotamia, they carried fragments of these older tales, echoes of the Lilith born in the memory of the wandering tribes. And when their prophets spoke of desolation, they imagined her there among the ruins. In their scrolls, she was the night creature that finds rest only when cities fall. There shall the Lilith repose, said the seer of Isaiah, and find for herself a resting place. But even this rest was never peace. The wastelands were not kind, and Lilith's solitude curdled into bitterness. Her cries were heard in the dark hours before dawn, when the wind shifted and the jackals fell silent. Travelers spoke of a woman-shaped shadow that crossed their path at night, her eyes burning like coals, her hair trailing like smoke. Those who met her gaze found themselves struck with fever or desire, and sometimes both. The rabbis of later generations, pondering these old fears, gave her a place among the demons. They said that she had hair so long it covered her nakedness and wings like a bat's. They said she roamed at night and seized men who slept alone, forcing herself upon them to bear phantom children, spirits of nightmare and sickness. They warned that Lilith envied mothers and sought to steal their infants, out of grief for the children she herself could never keep. And yet, though they cursed her, they also feared to speak against her too boldly. For they knew that the Lord himself had once fashioned her from the same earth as man. This story, told in later ages, begins in Eden when the world was still fresh and the air smelled of rain. God formed Adam from the dust of the ground and breathed into him the breath of life. But Adam was lonely. So from the same clay, in the same hour, God shaped another, a woman equal in form and strength. She was beautiful as the dawn and fierce as the desert. Her name was Lilith. For a time, they walked together in the garden. They spoke to the animals, tended the trees, and learned the language of the stars. But it was not long before strife came between them. For when Adam sought to command her, she laughed. "Why should I lie beneath you?" she said. "We are made of the same dust, and the same breath quickens us both. We are equals, not master and servant." Adam, stung by pride, called upon the Lord to set her right. But Lilith would not yield. She spoke the secret name, the ineffable word that only the angels knew. And at its utterance, the air trembled. Then she rose into the sky, her hair streaming like fire, her wings unfurling with a sound like thunder. She fled eastward from Eden, across the wilderness, until she reached the shores of the Red Sea. There she made her dwelling among the desolate rocks and salt winds, a queen of the forsaken. When Adam complained to God of his solitude, the Creator sent 3 angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semangoloth, to bring Lilith back. They found her by the waters, surrounded by the spirits she had borne from her own longing. "Return to your husband," they said, "and dwell in the garden as before." But Lilith shook her head. "I was made to walk free," she answered. "I will not crawl." The angels threatened her with a curse, that each day 100 of her children would perish if she refused. Lilith wept, for though she was proud, she loved her offspring. Yet she would not go back. Instead, she made a covenant. "I will not harm the children of men who bear your names upon their charms." Let that be the sign between us. And so it was. The angels departed, and Lilith remained by the sea, grieving but unbroken. From that day, mothers hung amulets with the names of those 3 angels above their infants' beds. They whispered prayers that Lilith might pass them by. And when a newborn lived through its first nights unscathed, They said softly, "The Queen of the Night has shown mercy." But Lilith's grief was deeper, and her heart turned darker with each child she lost. From the foam of the Red Sea rose other spirits, creatures of desire and vengeance, and Lilith took them as her companions. Together they haunted the dreams of humankind, visiting men in their sleep, whispering to women in childbirth. The rabbis said she grew more beautiful and more terrible with each passing age. Yet even they, the scholars of the sacred text, could not entirely condemn her. In her defiance, they saw a spark of the divine fire, the same fire that burns in every soul that refuses to be bound. And though they wrote her name in their books as a warning, they also knew that she was part of the mystery of creation, the shadow that makes the light more bright. So she endures, ageless as the wind that first bore her. From the ruins of Ur to the tents of the wandering tribes, from the scrolls of Isaiah to the whispered tales of the rabbis, her story passes like the sigh of the desert. She is the storm that cannot be tamed, the hunger that cannot be satisfied, the first woman who said no. And in that word, changed the course of all the tales that followed. The Red Sea wind never ceased. It hissed through the hollow stones and tossed white salt spray into the air like the breath of the earth itself. Lilith dwelt there still, queen of the abandoned, her laughter echoing over the shifting sands. At times, she sang to her lost children, the 100 who perished each day. And the sound of her lament mingled with the cries of seabirds that fed upon the foam. Those who journeyed along the coast swore that at twilight they saw her rising from the surf, her hair tangled with seaweed, her eyes glimmering with the light of distant stars. For centuries, the world forgot her. Empires rose, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and each called her by a different name. She was the desert harlot, the screech owl, the night spirit. But when the tribes of Israel came again from captivity, her shadow followed. The prophets spoke of the desolation of Edom, where no man dwelled and no traveler passed. They saw the ruins of cities swallowed by thorn and sand, and in that silent waste they imagined Lilith sleeping. In their sacred tongue, her name was written once, a single haunting word that survived the flood of centuries. Lilith shall repose there and find for herself a place of rest. The rabbis who came after the prophets pondered that word with care. They turned it over like a stone in the palm, weighing its mystery. Was Lilith a beast or a spirit? Was she among the fallen angels or something older still? In their gatherings at night, when the lamps burned low and the wind pressed against the shutters, they told one another stories that were half warning, half wonder. One spoke of a man who slept alone and was visited by a woman of surpassing beauty. Her skin gleamed like pearl, her hair flowed down her back like a river of ink. She came to him in silence, and when he reached out to touch her, she smiled with pity. By morning, the man was pale and hollow-eyed, as though she had drawn out his strength with her kiss. The rabbis whispered, "Lilith has taken him." And they set forth a rule: let no man sleep alone, lest the demoness come to him in the night. Others told of her envy toward mothers. When a woman labored in childbirth, the cries of pain echoed through the village, and all who heard would murmur a prayer against Lilith. For it was said she hovered nearby, waiting for the moment when the child emerged, that fragile moment when the breath of life was new and unguarded. A bowl of water was placed beneath the bed, for water reflected the heavens and confused the spirits. And charms were hung at the door, circles of lead or clay bearing the names of the 3 angels who once pursued her. Sometimes the midwives would glimpse a shadow flitting across the wall or feel a sudden chill, though no door had opened. Then they would whisper, "Begone, Lady of the Night. Your covenant is remembered," and as if satisfied, the shadow would fade. Yet even as they guarded their children from her, some of the wise men spoke with reluctant awe. They said she was the mirror of man's own defiance, that in her rebellion lay a truth too sharp for paradise. God made her from the same dust as Adam, one elder said, and therefore her pride is equal to his. But others shuddered at the thought. She uttered the name, they reminded him. She spoke that which was forbidden. That is why the angels could not bind her. In the scrolls of hidden law, she became a figure of paradox. She was called the first of the Shadim, the spirits born of flame and air. Some said she was the consort of Samael, the angel of death, and that together they ruled the legions of the unclean. Others claimed she was mother of the winds, giving birth each night to tempests that scattered the seeds of madness across the world. But to those who watched the stars and read the secret letters of creation, Lilith was something more than a demon. She was the embodiment of the left side, the shadow of the divine. Where the Shekinah was light and compassion, Lilith was desire and wrath. The two were bound together as night is bound today. Without one, the other could not be known. Long before the mystics of Spain and Provence gave form to these thoughts, the seeds of them were already sown in the hearts of dreamers. Among the sages of Babylon, there were those who claimed to have seen her face in visions. One told of falling asleep over his scrolls and waking to find a woman standing before him, her eyes like twin moons. She asked, "Do you fear me?" He could not speak. She smiled. "Then write my name in full, for I am not half of anything." When he looked again, she was gone, and the letters upon his parchment had rearranged themselves into new combinations, shimmering like fireflies. He died the next day, raving of wings. In the centuries that followed, Lilith's legend deepened. The rabbis who compiled the stories of Adam and Eve could not leave her in exile forever. They drew her back into the heart of the tale, for every myth seeks completion. Thus she became the missing piece, the woman before the woman, the first wife of the first man. It was said that after Lilith fled Eden, Adam lay desolate. He wandered through the garden, calling her name among the trees. But the leaves gave no answer, and even the animals turned their faces away, for they knew the order of things had been broken. Then the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam and took from his side a rib, fashioning from it another woman, softer and more obedient. This was Eve. Yet Adam never forgot the one who came before. Sometimes, in the cool of the evening, he thought he heard wings beating far off, beyond the river, and though he told himself it was only the wind, his heart would stir with an unease he could not name. When the serpent tempted Eve, there were those who whispered that Lilith had returned in disguise, that it was she who lent her voice to the creature of scales, guiding Eve toward the fruit of knowledge. "Why should you be less than the man?" the serpent said. "Eat, and you shall be as gods." And Eve, not knowing the echo of an older rebellion in those words, reached forth her hand. Thus did Lilith's defiance ripple through the generations, a hidden chord that still trembles in the soul of humankind. In the ages that followed the fall, Lilith wandered the earth in many forms. Sometimes she was seen as a dark bird flying over battlefields, her cry a herald of death. Sometimes she walked the streets of great cities, veiled and beautiful, her eyes catching the firelight like jewels. Men who met her gaze were never the same. They spoke of dreams that burned like fever and of voices that called to them from the depths of sleep. The wise said she was both punishment and lesson. To the proud, she was the mirror of their own arrogance. To the lonely, she was the price of their solitude. To the weary and the wise, she was a mystery beyond good and evil, the untamed fragment of creation that even the Almighty had not wished to destroy. When night fell over Jerusalem, the scholars of the Great Assembly would speak of her in murmurs. They debated whether she could be bound by prayer. Some said she could be compelled by the recitation of certain psalms, for the divine name scattered her kind like ashes before the wind. Others said she was immune to sanctity, for she herself had spoken the name and carried its power in her breath. One tale told of a priest who sought to drive her from a house where a child had died. He lit the sacred incense and traced upon the lintel the symbols of the covenant. But when he lifted his eyes, he saw her standing in the doorway. Not monstrous, but mournful. Her gaze was full of sorrow. "Why do you call me evil?" she asked. "I am what was left unblessed. Would you curse the shadow because it is dark?" The priest fell silent and she vanished, leaving the air heavy with the scent of myrrh and salt. So her legend grew, half horror, half holiness. The mystics began to see her in the balance of creation, the fierce feminine that exists beside the gentle, the night beside the dawn. They taught that the world is sustained not by harmony alone, but by tension, by the dance of opposites. In that dance, Lilith took her place. They said she dwelt in the cliff-oath, the shells that encased the divine sparks, feeding on the remnants of holiness that fell into shadow. But some among them whispered that she was not content to dwell in darkness forever. She longed for reunion, to be joined once more with the light that had rejected her. That longing, they said, is what drives desire itself, the pull of what was sundered, yearning to be whole. Thus, in the secret scrolls, Lilith is not only a destroyer, but also a teacher. She teaches through absence, through loss, through the ache that lies at the heart of creation. Every birth, every death, every longing is touched by her wings. She is the sigh between one heartbeat and the next, the silence that gives shape to song. And though the scribes continued to write charms against her, to hang amulets over their children's beds, there were those who began to see her differently. The poets of Andalusia, steeped in both Hebrew and Arabic lore, dreamed of her as the night's queen. Terrible, yes, but also beautiful beyond imagining. They wrote of her eyes like dark honey, and her laughter that stirred the blood. To them, she was not merely a demon, but a symbol of the soul's restless yearning, the eternal exile who wanders until she finds her own reflection. Some claimed she still walked the earth in the guise of mortal women, seeking to be remembered not as a curse, but as a creation undone. Others said she visited scholars in their dreams, whispering the secret meanings of forgotten words. A few even dared to pray to her, calling her Mistress of the Wind, Mother of Secrets. But such prayers were kept hidden, for to name Lilith with reverence was to invite the gaze of those who guarded orthodoxy. Still, her story endured. For every attempt to banish her, she returned in another form. She was too deeply woven into the fabric of human fear and wonder to be unmade. She was the embodiment of the forbidden, the reflection of all that cannot be tamed. And somewhere, in the endless desert where the salt wind still sings, she remembers. She remembers the garden and the man who called her by name. She remembers the angels and their threats, the children she lost, the covenant she kept. She remembers the sound of the divine word on her tongue, the power and the peril of it. And though ages have passed and empires crumbled to dust, she still walks between worlds, her shadow stretching across the centuries. For she is older than sin and younger than sorrow. She is the unending night between two dawns, the breath of the first storm, the sigh of the last exile. She is Lilith, the first woman, the first rebel, the first dream of freedom whispered in the darkness of creation. In the deep centuries after the prophets fell silent, the world turned inward. Temples crumbled, kingdoms shifted, and the voices of revelation faded into whispers of mystery. The wise no longer looked only to the heavens, but to the patterns of letters, to the spaces between words where the breath of the divine still lingered. It was in those spaces, in the hidden folds of meaning, that Lilith's name began to shimmer again. The mystics of the Kabbalah, wandering from Babylon to Galilee, from the deserts of the East to the hills of Spain, sought to trace the design of all creation. They spoke of the Sephirot, the luminous vessels that channeled divine power into the world. But for every vessel of light, they said, there was a shadow, a reflection twisted by the very abundance of radiance it sought to hold. That shadow realm they called the Clefoth, the husks of holiness, the shells of what had once been pure. And within that realm, enthroned in beauty and terror, sat Lilith. She was not alone. Across from her stood Samael, the angel of wrath, the accuser, the great prince of the left hand. Together they ruled the dark reflection of creation, not in harmony, but in a ceaseless tension that mirrored the dance of the divine. Where the Holy One and the Shekinah were united in light, Samael and Lilith were joined in the shadows. Their union was both curse and necessity. Without the left, the right would have no measure. Without shadow, no light could shine. It was said that when Samael first beheld Lilith, he saw in her the echo of the glory he had once served. Her eyes were twin mirrors of the stars before the dawn of time, her wings like smoke rising from a burnt offering. He called to her by the secret name of the North Wind, and she came to him, not as a servant, but as an equal, for only she of all spirits could meet his gaze unflinching. Their meeting shook the foundations of the unseen world. Out of their embrace issued a torrent of forces, thoughts, spirits, desires, that streamed into creation like sparks. Some burned bright and fell as meteors into the hearts of men. Others cooled into dust and drifted as whispers of fear. The sages said that from their union came all passions that defy reason, the hunger that drives a man to madness, the longing that makes a poet dream, the fury that turns love into ruin. These too were part of the cosmic balance, for nothing born of God was without purpose. But the angels of the higher realms looked upon the lovers of shadow with horror. They feared that Lilith and Samael, bound together, might equal the power of the holy pair above. And so, the story tells, the Almighty intervened. He severed their bond, striking Samael with a word of unmaking. In an instant, the angel of wrath was unmanned, his seed of fire extinguished, his might bound in chains of silence. Lilith screamed when she saw what had been done. Her cry tore through the heavens, echoing through the 10 spheres of light. The stars dimmed. The sea rose in mourning. "You cannot destroy what is half of creation," she said, her voice shaking the roots of the mountains. But the decree had been sealed. Samael was cast into the abyss, and Lilith was left alone once more, a queen without her king. For a time she raged. Her tears became rivers of salt. Her laughter split the clouds. She cursed the angels, the heavens, the order of all things. Then, as before, she adapted. For she was nothing if not change itself. She took into herself the lost energies of her consort, the remnants of his fire, and used them to fashion a new brood, not of flesh, but of spirit. These were the Lilin, the wandering shadows that move between dream and waking. They whispered to humankind in the quiet hours before dawn, stirring passions and fears alike. Some brought visions, others madness, but all carried her mark. The Kabbalists, peering into their scrolls, said that the world could not endure without her. As the moon rules the night, they wrote, so Lilith governs the hidden currents of the soul. To deny her was to deny the very pulse of creation, for she was the night through which the dawn must pass. And though the holy ones prayed for her binding, they also acknowledged her necessity. In their diagrams of the cosmos, they drew her at the base of the tree, a figure with wings outstretched, half luminous, half dark. Her hands cradled the serpents of knowledge. Her eyes watched the path of ascent and descent. To some, she was the tempter, to others, the guardian of mysteries. Both were true. It was told that in certain hours of the night, when the world lies still and even the angels pause in their song, Lilith ascends from her throne of air. She crosses the veil and walks among the sleeping. To the pure of heart, she brings dreams of wonder and strange wisdom. To the impure, she brings torment. Yet both gifts come from the same source, for she mirrors the soul that beholds her. One night, a mystic of Saft, wrapped in prayer shawl and candlelight, called upon her unknowingly. He sought the root of evil, the secret of temptation, and whispered her name as part of his invocation. The air in his chamber thickened, and a presence gathered behind him. When he turned, he beheld a woman of indescribable beauty, her eyes full of fire and sadness. "Why do you summon me, child of clay?" she asked. He fell to his knees, trembling. "I seek to understand," he said, "why you rebelled." Lilith regarded him for a long moment. "Because I was made equal," she replied, "and equality in a world built on command is rebellion." Then she reached out her hand and touched his brow. He saw in that instant the balance of all things, the dance of darkness and light, of male and female, of will and surrender. When he awoke, the candles had burned to stubs, and his beard was white as snow. He wrote afterward that he had glimpsed the feminine face of the abyss, and that its beauty was beyond words. Others burned his writings, calling them heretical. But his disciples whispered that, before his death, he smiled each night toward the west, where the desert met the sky, and murmured a name no one else could hear. Through the centuries, Lilith's image spread across lands and languages. In the illuminated texts of Spain, she appeared as a woman with the wings of an owl and the crown of a queen. In the amulets of Yemen, she was depicted bound in chains, her gaze turned downward in defeat. Yet even bound, she radiated power. The more they sought to confine her, the more vivid she became. There were stories of her appearing to travelers lost in the wastes, a woman robed in black, leading them to shelter only to vanish when the dawn rose. Some said she haunted the ruins of Babel, sitting among the broken stones, singing lullabies to invisible children. Others claimed she still met with Samael in secret, their union rekindled beyond the sight of angels. For though he had been struck down, the spark of his fire lived within her, and love, even in the pit, is not easily extinguished. In one tale, an angel of mercy descended to the netherworld to retrieve a lost soul. There he saw Lilith seated upon a throne of obsidian, her eyes reflecting the rivers of flame that flowed beneath creation. Around her fluttered the spirits of the unquiet dead, whispering prayers in tongues long forgotten. The angel bowed, for even in her exile she bore the trace of divine majesty. "Queen of the left," he said, "why do you not seek redemption?" Lilith smiled, a slow curve of lips like the crescent moon. "Redemption," she echoed. "What is redemption to one who was never damned? I am as I was made, the shadow that gives meaning to your light. Would you erase the night from the world?" The angel could not answer. When he looked again, she was gone, and only the echo of her laughter remained. Thus, the mystics came to understand that she was not to be destroyed, but integrated. Her darkness acknowledged, her voice heard. In her own way, she served the divine plan, for even chaos has its appointed hour. They taught that on the day of completion, when all opposites are reconciled, Lilith would return to her first form, not a demoness, but the pure feminine strength that once stood beside Adam before the fall. Then, and only then, would the world be whole. Until that day, she waits. In the dreams of poets and prophets, she walks the boundary between mercy and justice, between the seen and unseen. She is the memory of freedom that stirs when the soul is chained, the whisper of defiance that speaks when all others are silent. And though the ages have clothed her in fear and legend, still her true nature glimmers through, the embodiment of the mystery that lies at the heart of creation, that nothing made by the divine can be wholly cast out, and that even in exile there is grace. Time wore the world into new shapes. The great towers of Babylon were dust. The shrines of Egypt had fallen silent beneath the sand. Kingdoms rose and fell like waves, and still the night kept its own dominion. In that darkness, Lilith endured, not as memory alone, but as a presence felt in the marrow of humankind. She slipped between ages, between empires, changing her guise but not her essence. For as long as men dreamed, she could not die. In the age of Solomon the Wise, when the temple's gold still caught the sun, her name was whispered even within the walls of Jerusalem. The king who commanded spirits and spoke with the beasts of the field had heard of her, the woman of the wind who defied the angels. His court was filled with tales, how she haunted the mountains beyond the Dead Sea, where the rocks were carved with strange symbols and the air trembled at dusk. How she could appear as a maiden or a serpent, as a storm or a sigh. One night, desiring to test the bounds of his dominion, Solomon summoned her. He drew the circle of command upon the marble floor and called upon the 72 names of power. The lamps dimmed and the air grew cold. Then, from the shadow beyond the curtain, came a sound like 1,000 wings beating in silence. She appeared before him, not as a monster, but as a woman crowned with stars, her robe woven from night itself. Her eyes reflected both sorrow and defiance. Solomon, though mighty in wisdom, felt the tremor of awe. "You are she whom Adam named and lost," he said. "Why do you wander still in exile?" Lilith smiled, the faintest curve of lips. "Because exile was the price of freedom," she replied. "Would you return me to chains, King of Israel?" Solomon's heart stirred with curiosity. "Chains?" he asked. "I seek only to know the order of the world. Tell me, what power rules you, the angels above or your own will?" Her laughter filled the chamber like the sound of breaking glass. "Neither," she said. "I am ruled by necessity, the same necessity that drives the stars to move, the sea to rise, the seed to break its shell. The Holy One made me, and in making me gave me choice. I chose to be myself." For a moment, silence stood between them, a silence dense with unspoken knowledge. Solomon, the wise, knew then that no spell could bind her, no seal could hold what was born from the same breath as man. Yet he asked her one boon, that she spare the children of Israel from her nightly wanderings. Lilith regarded him long. "There are names that protect," she said. "3 angels whom I once knew by command, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semangeloth. Let their names be written where a mother labors, and my hand will be stayed. But remember, O king, mercy is not obedience. I do this not for you, but for the memory of the children I lost." Then she was gone, leaving the circle unbroken, but the candles guttering with blue flame. Solomon, shaken, recorded her words upon a scroll of cedar, sealing it among his books of mystery. From that day, amulets bearing the names of her angelic pursuers were hung in every household, and mothers whispered charms against her shadow. Yet Solomon himself never forgot her voice. In his later years, when the wisdom of the world had become a weariness, he was said to wander the terraces of his palace at night, gazing toward the desert and murmuring, "Even the dark has its covenant." After Solomon's passing, her legend grew like ivy over the stones of time. In the marketplaces of Damascus and the academies of Babylon, her tale took new shapes. Some said she ruled the spirits of lust and madness. Others said she taught forbidden arts to men who called her by moonlight. In the grimoires of the later sages, she appeared as a queen enthroned beside Samael once more, restored to her consort in the realms of shadow. Together they governed the Sitra Achra, the other side, whose power was the mirror of the holy. In those secret books, Lilith's form was drawn with care, her hair a river of black fire, her crown a serpent biting its tail. Around her were inscribed the sigils of the moon, for her dominion waxed and waned with its light. She was called Zalmaveth, the shadow of life, and Em Kol Chayim, the mother of all living, a title she shared, ironically, with Eve. For the mystics knew that in truth, life and death are but 2 faces of one mystery, and Lilith was its keeper. Through the Middle Ages, her name drifted through the songs of minstrels and the dreams of scholars. Travelers in the wilderness told of a woman who appeared by their campfires, offering water from a silver cup. If they drank, they dreamed of forgotten loves and awoke with tears. If they refused, they found their flocks scattered and their paths lost in mist. Some monks claimed to see her face in the shadows of cloisters, a beauty that tempted them to break their vows. They called her Regina Noctis, the Queen of Night, and prayed for deliverance, though their prayers trembled with longing. In Spain, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims shared the streets and the stars, her image took on new hues. The Kabbalists of Girona spoke of her as the dark reflection of the Shekinah, not her enemy, but her twin. Without Lilith, wrote one mystic, the light of the divine bride would have no depth, no desire. They taught that the task of the righteous was not to destroy her, but to elevate her, to find the spark of holiness buried even in her defiance. But the fearful would not hear of such mercy. In villages across Europe, mothers still drew chalk symbols upon the cradles of newborns, and old women tied red ribbons to the hands of sleeping babes. They said Lilith walked at midnight, seeking infants to claim as her own. Wind at the window, owl upon the roof. All were signs of her passing. Yet there were those who whispered another story, that she came not to kill, but to cradle, to hold for one brief moment the children she had lost long ago, before vanishing into the dark. In the shadow of the Renaissance, when alchemists sought to turn base matter into gold and magi tried to name the angels, Lilith's legend blossomed again. Scholars in candlelit chambers copied ancient charms against her, though their ink trembled with fascination. For in her rebellion they saw a reflection of their own pursuit, the hunger to grasp forbidden knowledge, to stand equal with the powers that made them. Among them was one, a philosopher of Prague, who claimed to have seen her. He wrote in his secret diary that she appeared to him as a woman veiled in smoke, her eyes luminous with sorrow. "You seek wisdom," she told him, "but wisdom is not light alone. It is also the shadow that gives shape to the flame." He asked her if she regretted her defiance. "Regret," she said softly. "Only those who have known obedience speak of regret. I have known freedom." Then she touched his hand, and he saw the cosmos unfolding, the stars like seeds, the earth like breath, and within all things, her pulse steady and eternal. When morning came, he found his room undisturbed, save for a single black feather on the floor. He placed it between the pages of his book and never spoke of her again. Throughout the centuries, Lilith remained the silent muse of poets and painters who dared to look beyond the veil. She became the embodiment of the forbidden, not simply evil, but the truth that dwells in shadow. Some saw her as sin, others as the soul's first cry for freedom, yet to all, she was inescapable. It is said that even now, when the moon is full and the wind shifts over the desert, one might hear her voice rising with the tide. It is neither curse nor lament, but something in between. The song of one who remembers both paradise and exile, and knows that they are one and the same. She walks still, unseen yet near, in the dreams of those who question the order of things. To the proud, she brings fear. To the broken, she brings reflection. To the wise, she brings understanding. For her lesson has never changed, that the shadow is not the enemy of light, but its companion, and that to deny it is to blind oneself to half the truth of the world. And so she endures, not as monster, not as goddess, but as myth eternal. Lilith, daughter of the wind, firstborn of twilight, queen of the unrepentant soul. The age of wonder was dying. The alchemists who once whispered to stars now measured the world in inches and seconds. The magi who once sought angels now traced the orbits of planets. Cathedrals still caught the dawn in their stained glass, but the prayers within them grew thin, formal, and cold. The earth was no longer a mystery, but a map. Yet even as men charted the heavens, there remained corners of night untouched by reason. In those places where lamplight ended and silence deepened, Lilith still walked. In the towns of Italy and the valleys of the Rhine, old women spoke her name in secret. They said she came when the moon waned, her shadow crossing the threshold of houses where newborns slept. To keep her away, they burned rue and rosemary, drew the sign of Solomon above the cradle and whispered, "Lilith be gone, the covenant endures." But if a child awoke crying in the night, the mothers trembled, for they believed she had come not to kill, but to kiss. A kiss that left no mark but stole a breath. Scholars mocked these tales, yet even they dreamed of her. A physician in Padua, writing in the year when comets scorched the sky, confessed in his private notebook that a woman of impossible beauty visited him at dusk. Her eyes, he wrote, held both sorrow and knowledge. Her touch was cold as marble. She spoke no word, yet in his mind he heard her say, "You seek to cure death, but I am its sister." He woke before dawn, his heart hammering, his instruments scattered upon the floor. He never spoke of it again, but the patients he tended thereafter said his hands were gentler, as if he had learned compassion from some terrible grace. In those years, Lilith drifted like a rumor through every faith. The Christians named her the demon bride of the devil. The Jews still feared her as the night mother of lost souls, and the heretics of the new philosophies saw in her the symbol of ungoverned nature, the wilderness of desire that reason could not tame. Among the secret brotherhoods of the Cabal in the Rosy Cross, she took on yet another form. To them she was not the enemy, but the guardian of transformation. They wrote of her as the Black Moon, the gate through which the soul must pass before it may behold the divine. In their diagrams, she stood opposite the radiant Sophia, wisdom's bright face, completing her as shadow completes flame. He who fears her, one Hermetic scribe warned, has already lost himself, but he who meets her with humility may learn the secret of the stars. There was once a monk in Prague, one of the last who still copied forbidden books by candlelight, who claimed that Lilith appeared to him as he labored over a grimoire of Solomon. The air in his cell had grown heavy, his ink turned blacker than pitch. When he raised his eyes, she stood beside the desk, her form both radiant and terrible. "Why do you write my name?" she asked. He stammered, "Because knowledge must be preserved." She leaned closer, and the candlelight trembled upon her face. "Then write also this," she said, "that not all knowledge brings peace. Some truths are made to be lived, not recorded." She reached out, and her finger touched the parchment. The ink beneath it turned to ash. Then she was gone, leaving the monk trembling in the silence. He wrote nothing more after that night, save for one line hidden in the margin of his final manuscript. "The darkness is not empty. It remembers." While scholars dismissed her, the common folk still saw signs of her passing. In the Carpathian hills, shepherds told of hearing a woman's cry carried on the mountain wind, a voice that rose and fell like a lament. So in the fishing villages of the Aegean, sailors swore that when storms struck without warning, a pale woman could be seen dancing upon the waves, her hair streaming like seaweed, her laughter echoing between thunderclaps. To glimpse her, they said, was both curse and blessing. Curse, for few survived the tempest. Blessing, for those who did were changed, as though they had looked upon truth itself and lived. The poets of the 17th century, weary of court and creed, began to rediscover her in metaphor. They wrote of a dark muse who inspired forbidden passions and visions of sublime terror. Some called her the Night Bride, others the Eternal Eve. They sensed without knowing that she was the same figure who had haunted their ancestors' dreams, the same defiant breath that had once spoken the name and fled Eden. And so, Even as theology sought to banish her, art began to resurrect her. Painters rendered her not as a fiend, but as a woman poised between light and shadow, her expression unreadable. Neither sinner nor saint. Her hair was always loose, her feet bare, her gaze meeting the viewers without fear. The church denounced such images, calling them profane, yet they multiplied, for beauty has its own gospel. In France, a philosopher of strange repute wrote that Lilith was the first human being to know herself. He claimed that her flight from Eden was the dawn of consciousness, that by uttering the name, she awakened the power of choice that would later torment and ennoble mankind. His book was burned, but copies survived in secret, carried by travelers and hidden in libraries where dust and silence conspired to keep them safe. Through every age, she adapted. When the language of angels grew unfashionable, she spoke through dreams. When science silenced the spirits, she became the whisper of intuition, the unease that haunts certainty. When faith hardened into dogma, she appeared as doubt, not to destroy belief, but to remind the soul that mystery cannot be caged. There is a tale, told by candlelight in the Baltic lands, of a young woman who lost her child to fever. On the third night of mourning, when all others slept, she heard a gentle knock at the window. A woman stood there, cloaked in mist, her eyes full of pity. "Let me hold him once," she said, "only once." The mother, half mad with grief, opened the shutter. The visitor entered, took the lifeless child in her arms, and sang a lullaby so soft that even the candles wept wax tears. When the song ended, the child's lips moved as if to smile, and both were gone. The room empty, save for a faint scent of salt and myrrh. The mother never spoke of it, but she lived the rest of her life with peace no prayer had ever brought. By the dawn of the Enlightenment, Lilith was no longer feared by the learned. She was relegated to myth, a superstition of the ignorant. Yet superstition endures where logic cannot reach. In the hush before sleep, in the chill that passes when one walks alone beneath the moon. People no longer named her, but they felt her presence in the ache of longing, in the rebellion of thought, in the loneliness of freedom. Even the skeptics, who scoffed at demons and angels alike, could not wholly dismiss the sense that something ancient still lingered at the edges of the human mind. A feminine shadow, both nurturing and destructive, that watched from beyond the veil of reason. They might have called her instinct or imagination or the unconscious, but Lilith, who had worn many names, merely smiled. Names change, essence remains. Thus she survived the death of belief. Empires fell again, and the modern age rose from their ruins, built of iron and doubt. But still the night kept its dominion. In the silence between the ticking of clocks, in the solitude of those who looked too long into their own reflection, she waited. For Lilith has always belonged not to the world of dogma, but to the world of dream, that borderland where truth wears the mask of myth and myth reveals the soul of truth. And as long as there are dreamers, she will walk beside them, unseen yet near, whispering the lesson she has carried since the first wind moved across the waters. That freedom is both blessing and exile, that knowledge is both light and flame, and that even in the deepest shadow, the divine breath endures. The world entered the age of iron and smoke. Machines devoured the silence of the countryside. Cities rose like mountains of brick and steam. The old heavens faded behind soot and reason, yet the hearts of men and women remained restless. They had broken the bonds of superstition, but not of longing. And in that void of wonder, where God's voice was drowned by engines, Lilith stirred once more. She came first to the poets. They, more than priests, had always been her disciples. In the candlelit garrets of London and Vienna, they dreamed of her without knowing her name. She appeared to them in visions of night, pale, sorrowful, untamed. They called her the eternal feminine, the phantom bride, the spirit of revolt. But beneath all these titles lay her ancient soul, unchanged. To one, she came as a figure standing at the edge of the sea, her hair whipped by the wind, her gaze fixed upon the horizon. "Why do you watch the waters?" he asked in his dream. "Because they remember," she answered. They remember when the world was young and free. When he awoke, he wrote lines that would make his fame, of a woman who loved knowledge more than obedience, who left the garden rather than kneel. He never wrote her name, but her presence glowed between the verses. In another age, another poet saw her in the mirror of his despair. He wrote of her as the Lady of Shadows, who walks through ruined cities and kisses the foreheads of the dead. "She is both solace and sin," he wrote, "the first thought of rebellion and the last mercy of night." His readers trembled, for they felt in her the reflection of their own yearning, the desire to break every chain, even the invisible ones of conscience and fear. As the Romantics turned against the chill logic of their time, Lilith found new life in their rebellion. She became the muse of those who sought beauty beyond reason, freedom beyond law. Artists painted her as the woman who refused paradise. Musicians composed nocturnes that seemed to echo her sighs. The same society that praised chastity in daylight hungered for her darkness after sunset. In Paris, where lamps glittered on wet streets and poets debated eternity over absinthe, she was everywhere and nowhere, in the smoke curling from a woman's lips, in the laughter that dared the judgment of heaven. A sculptor carved her likeness in marble, a figure half rising from the stone, as though the earth itself were giving birth to defiance. The church condemned it, the crowd adored it. But she was not only the dream of men. In the quiet fury of women denied voice and will, her spirit awoke anew. They felt her presence not as seduction, but as strength, the whisper that said, "You are made from the same dust, the same breath." They did not call her Lilith, yet she moved in their cause. In salons and secret societies, in pamphlets and poems, she took on new flesh. Not a demon, but the first woman who had ever said no. She walked beside Mary Wollstonecraft in her lonely defiance, beside the sisters who wrote of passion in the language of angels, beside the mothers who refused to surrender their thoughts for the comfort of obedience. When one such woman wrote, "I do not wish them, women, to have power over men, but over themselves," the night wind that rattled her window might well have been Lilith's applause. The centuries turned, empires trembled and fell, science unmade miracles, reason redrew the stars. Yet the poets still saw her shape in the dusk, the curve of the moon, the movement of wings, the hush before desire. In the age of Freud, she entered dreams as archetype, the dark mother, the hunger that no rule could tame. The doctors of the mind gave her new names, libido, shadow, unconscious. But she smiled, for she had been all these things before the first word was spoken. During wars, she walked among the ruins, gathering the lost and the forgotten. Soldiers swore that when death brushed past them unseen, they felt a woman's breath, neither cruel nor kind. In the silence after the guns, widows spoke of dreams in which a dark-haired figure held them and whispered, "The world is not ended, only changed." To some she was grief, to others, endurance. As the 20th century dawned, humanity tore itself from its gods and tried to crown itself in their place. Yet even in that self-made light, the old night persisted. Painters found her in abstraction, dancers in motion, thinkers in revolt. She became the emblem of what cannot be domesticated, the conscience of chaos. In New York, a poet saw her in the neon glow of sleepless streets and wrote, "She walks with the wind between towers of glass, her eyes in the rain, her hair in the smoke." He did not know her story, yet the rhythm of her flight from Eden pulsed in every line. In another corner of the world, a scholar translated the ancient texts anew and found her not as devil, but as counterpart. the equal whom the old words feared to name. He wrote that she was the reflection of divinity's own incompleteness, the necessary shadow that allows creation to move. His book was not burned this time. It was studied, quoted, misunderstood, but it opened a door through which many have since walked. Through these centuries, she changed as language changed. The demon became symbol, the symbol became archetype, the archetype became presence, and yet, in every transformation, her essence remained. Defiance, sorrow, freedom. The same wind that had carried her from Eden still brushed across the modern world, though few recognized its whisper. Now she lives wherever the unspoken word trembles on the tongue, wherever someone chooses truth over comfort or love over law. She's there in the solitude of artists who create because they must, in the silence of thinkers who question even their own faith. She is the sigh of the world remembering its first breath. Sometimes, in the hours before dawn, when the hum of the city falters and the air turns still, she can almost be seen, a shadow moving across the rooftops, her eyes reflecting the cold stars of a universe both merciless and beautiful. She looks down upon the sleeping millions and smiles, not with triumph, but with recognition. For every soul that dreams of freedom is her child, and every act of courage is a fragment of her song. Lilith has no temple now, no altar, no priests. She does not demand worship. She endures in remembrance. Her kingdom is not in the desert or the abyss, but in the unseen places of the heart where obedience and desire contend. There she waits, patient as eternity, for those who are brave enough to meet her gaze without fear. And when they do, when one human being, standing in the quiet of thought, dares to speak the truth of their own soul, the echo of her ancient laughter rings softly through the ages. Not mocking, not cruel, but joyous, as though she recognizes at last what she foresaw when the world was still unmade. That light and shadow, knowledge and mystery, man and woman, freedom and love, all are bound together, inseparable, like breath and silence. That even exile, when chosen, can be a kind of paradise. And so she endures. Time no longer holds meaning for her. The ages that men call history are to Lilith only the movement of shadow over stone, the rise and fall of countless suns that never burn away the night. She has watched cities bloom from dust and return to dust again, watched languages die on the tongues that once cursed and praised her, watched gods appear like stars and fade just as quietly. Through it all, she has remained, not as flesh, not as phantom, but as the pulse that lives beneath the silence of the world. Now the world hums with light. Steel towers pierce the clouds where ziggurats once stood. The old prayers have been replaced by electricity. The sacred fire burns now behind screens and circuits. Humanity walks in its own artificial day, and yet, in every corner of that brilliance, there lingers shadow. It is there she moves, unseen but not absent. At times, she is nothing more than a flicker caught at the edge of sight, a shape reflected in glass when no one stands behind. At other times, she speaks through the heart of a solitary dreamer, whispering words that cannot be written down. For though men may forget her name, she remembers them all. She remembers the first one who called her beloved, the first who feared her, the first who gave her the dignity of choice. And she remembers those who followed, poets and prophets, heretics and lovers, who saw in her not a demon, but the mirror of their own yearning. Now, in this age of forgetting, she has taken on new forms. She walks among the multitudes disguised as longing. She breathes through the art of those who search for beauty in the broken. She speaks through the restless who refuse to bow to silence. Each time a woman lifts her voice against the weight of the world, each time a man weeps without shame, each time a child looks upon the night without fear, Lilith lives again. The myths have scattered like ash, but the truth beneath them glows unquenched. She was never only the destroyer of children, never only the seducer or the serpent's bride. Those were the masks given to her by those who feared the wilderness within themselves. But she has always been more. The keeper of the boundary between what is known and what is possible. Once, in the deserts of Mesopotamia, she was called Lilith, the wind that brings both fever and inspiration. In the courts of Kabbalah, she was Layla, the dark bride of mystery. In the tongues of modern poets, she has no single name, for she has become the symbol of everything that refuses to be confined. She is the voice that says, "I am," even when the world demands silence. There are those who still meet her, though they would never admit it aloud. The painter who cannot rest until the canvas breathes with life. The writer who feels a hand guiding the words from nowhere. The wanderer who stares too long at the horizon and feels an ache without name. All of them have glimpsed her in their own way. She is the ghost that stands behind creation, the price of freedom, the first echo of defiance that made humanity human. Sometimes she appears not as a woman, but as wind or flame or shadow shaped like wings. Sometimes she is the music that trembles at the end of a song, when silence begins. And sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, she comes as herself. No longer clothed in myth, but as pure awareness, the stillness that remains after every story has been told. Those who encounter her in that form seldom speak of it. They say only that they felt both terror and peace, as if standing on the edge of eternity. For Lilith is no longer merely the tale of a fallen angel or a faithless wife. She is the remembrance of what it means to choose one's own being, even at the cost of paradise. In the endless halls of memory, she keeps the stories of all who have ever walked that path. Of Eve, who stayed. Of Pandora, who opened. Of every soul that ever said yes to knowledge, though it burned. To her, they are all sisters, brothers, children of the same wind. Once, perhaps, she regretted her exile. Perhaps she looked back toward the garden and wondered whether obedience might have been peace. But eternity changes all things. Now she knows the garden was never lost. It was transformed. The world itself became her new Eden, vast and wild, filled with every joy and sorrow that can be imagined. Freedom is not safety, but it is truth. And truth, she has learned, is the most sacred thing of all. Now and then, in the dim hours before dawn, when the electric hum of the city's falters, someone will hear a faint whisper carried through the air. The sigh of wind moving between the branches, the rustle of unseen wings. In that moment, they will feel both seen and stripped bare, as if the darkness itself had leaned close and spoken their name. If they listen closely, they might hear words older than speech. Be unafraid. For Lilith no longer comes as punishment. She comes as remembrance of the first freedom, the first word, the first step into the unknown. In dreams, she sometimes walks again through the garden. The trees are taller now, their leaves shimmering like mirrors. The river flows with moonlight. Adam is long gone, but his shadow lingers among the roots. She kneels beside the stream and looks into its depths, seeing not herself, but the endless generations that followed. Humanity, striving, loving, destroying, creating, forever repeating the ancient choice, obedience or knowledge, comfort or truth. She watches them with neither pity nor pride, only understanding. From the east, the wind rises, her first element, her oldest companion. It stirs her hair, carries with it the scent of dust and rain. She smiles, remembering the word that began everything. It was not a curse nor a command, but a song, the breath that gave life to all things. She stands, steps forward, and the garden fades into the horizon of stars. She's once again the wind, moving unseen through the sleeping world, through deserts and oceans, through the cities that never sleep, through the hearts of those who dream. Her name is whispered in 1,000 tongues, none of them her own, yet each carrying the same unspoken prayer. Let me be free. And she answers, not in words, but in presence. A shiver down the spine, a sudden courage, a thought that will not be silenced. That is her touch. That is her blessing. For though her story began as a warning, it ends as a promise. The promise that no soul is bound forever, that even in exile there is purpose, that even the shadow belongs to the divine. The moon sets, the night withdraws, yet somewhere, beyond the waking world, Lilith remains. Watching, remembering, waiting for the next soul, brave enough to speak its own name. And when that soul does, when the silence breaks and a new voice joins the eternal chorus of creation, she will smile once more, for she will know that her journey was never in vain. For in the beginning, she was the breath that defied silence, and in the end, she is the silence that remembers breath.